Good evening, and welcome to this session of Tuesday's Encounters in New York. This program is presented every Tuesday at 7 p.m. New York time. My name is Mark Beecher, and I'll be your host today. Our guest tonight is Jen Sullivan, an author whose captivating journey through past lives and healing has been chronicled in her renowned books, The Child of the Universe and Gifts of the Stars. Jen has an impressive resume of teaching, journalism, and metaphysical research into past lives. Jen, as an author, is listed as JLF, Jen Sullivan. So Jen, please welcome, and if you could open your microphone. Hi, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing today, Mark?
Good, good. We're experiencing some early spring in New Jersey, so.
Oh, that's always my favorite time of year when it comes a little early and surprises you.
Yep, yep. Um, so, are you going to speak to us about past lives tonight, or?
Definitely. I'd like to tell everyone a little bit about a strange experience that I had a couple of years ago and kind of the path that it's led me on and the outcome of understanding a bit more of something that we know as past lives.
Okay.
All right. All right, I'll give you a little bit of background to my story, Mark, so you can better understand fully the effect that this has had on me and my life and others around me. It all started back in 2017, so a couple of years ago. And one day, we were living in the Florida Keys, my family and I. I had small children, I had a business, I had a whole life in the Florida Keys. And one day we got a notice from our government saying that a Category 5 hurricane was heading our way, that we had to board up our home, evacuate the island, and get out of Florida as fast as we could. So my husband and I, we did the best we could. We boarded up our businesses, we boarded up our home, we tried to store what we could, and we kind of just left the Keys and hope for the best. And when we came back after the hurricane had come through the island, everything was gone. Our house was destroyed, our businesses were destroyed, our cars were gone. And to make matters worse, our local government would not pick up the debris from the hurricane. It got into a bit of a fight between the state and the local government over who had the contract to pick everything up. And since nobody could decide who had the contract, nothing got picked up for 8 months. We sat living in hurricane debris, toxic stuff all around us.
Yeah.
On that, we had full insurance on our home, and our insurance companies took us through the ringer trying to nickel and dime every last thing and made the experience terrible. So for months, we had no choice, almost a year actually, to live on our front lawn with our small children, with hurricane debris all around us, and just try to figure out how to live our lives now that we had no way to make income anymore or really no home to live in. So it wasn't surprising when a few months into the ordeal, I woke up one morning and I couldn't see out of my right eye. I went to University of Miami. I went to Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. I went to the best places I could go for traditional medicine to help me understand what was going on with my eye. I was diagnosed with a condition called pseudotumor cerebri, and it's a condition that's becoming more prevalent more and more these days. It's a situation where you have too much cerebrospinal fluid that suddenly starts being created around your brain, and it puts so much pressure on your brain and your ocular nerves that it causes you to lose your vision. So what I was experiencing was the beginning of vision loss and a long-term situation that was unfortunately, not the most ideal when you're living in that kind of a situation, nor having small children. Ultimately, it could lead to you having a stroke because of all the excess spinal, all the excess fluid in your brain. So I wasn't in the best condition at that point in my life, but we did the best we could. And a few months into the ordeal, a woman that I knew from the school that my children went to contacted me. She was a hypnotist. And she said that she was doing a project and she was wondering if I would be interested in being hypnotized for free. And so I said, sure, does the hypnosis that you're doing, is it possible that it has anything to do with like, could it help me with this medical issue I'm having, or at least give me a little bit of a stress break so that way I could kind of get my get my life together in any way while we were living like that. And she said, surprisingly, yes, the specific type of hypnosis that she did is called quantum healing hypnosis. And it was invented by a woman named Dolores Cannon, who a lot of people who are into metaphysical and past lives know this name very well. So I got very lucky. This woman, her name is Sarah Breskman Cosme. She's now a pretty famous hypnotist. And she started giving me this hypnosis sessions for free. And on my first hypnosis session that I sat down for, I traditionally, I didn't think this was something that was going to work. I wasn't very inclined into this kind of stuff. I didn't really go into the spiritual realm, crystals, all that kind of stuff. It just wasn't for me. I have a background of, I have 2 master's degrees from the University of London. I'm not someone who looks at things and kind of just feels like, oh, okay, well, it's feel-goodery, so it must be real. I really try to have a factual background to anything I try to believe in as much as possible. So I went along with it and I did the hypnosis session. And what surprised me the most in this hypnosis session was when I was done with the first session, I felt this draining feeling going through the back of my head. And when I came out of the hypnotic trance, I could see again out of this eye. It was very blurry, but it was more than I had been able to see in months and months and months. So whatever it was, I knew we were onto something. While I continued to go to the hospitals and try to get treatment for this condition, I didn't get very far. Doctors aren't really sure what causes it or the best way to treat it. And unfortunately, it kind of leaves you in a place where you're just left in pain and left suffering. And it's one of those kind of situations. So I continued to do the hypnosis, and the medication that the doctors kept putting me on actually only made me sicker. So I found the most relief that I was getting from the whole situation was through this hypnosis. Now, the interesting thing, actually, the part that I find to be like the most remarkable was what the hypnosis sessions actually allowed for. So I wasn't sure if I believed in past lives. I'm not sure if you believe in past lives, but a majority of the world does believe in past lives. If you look
Mhm.
to the Eastern cultures, past lives are a very strict part of their belief systems, of their spirituality. While here in the Western world, we kind of, have nuances towards it and we use it in the romantic sense and whatnot. But when it comes to actually believing in them, most people just laugh at it and think, whatever. So I had my first session and I wanted to know, well, if this is real and this is past lives, what was the most recent past life that I had? So we go into the session and I'm shown this image of this woman who lived in the 1970s, and she was a young woman and she ends up jumping off a bridge and killing herself. And I was like, this is very strange because I kind of understand and remember this person, but why would I do something like that? Why would I be left to go into that kind of a desperate situation? Because in this lifetime, I've never had that kind of inclination. I've never had any kind of psychiatric illnesses, anything like that would lead me
Right.
to something like that. So it was confusing. So I said, well, let's dig a little bit more. Why would I have wanted to do this in a past life? And what I found out, okay, so follow me on this one. While we were understanding this most recent past life, we understood that she ended up ending her life because of what she understood from another previous past life, something that took place almost 50,000 years ago before we started recording our history, before Sumeria, before any of this. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the concept that there was a continent at one point in the Pacific Ocean. Some people call it Mu, some people call it Lemuria. Call it whatever you want, but a lot of archaeological evidence points to the fact now that there was once a continent in the Pacific Ocean that's no longer there, whether it be a result of sea rise, climate change, earth changes, whatever you want to call it. We don't have it, but there are remnants of it that are showing up now. So in these past life regressions, Sarah took me back and back and back over and over again to understand this one past life that happened 50,000 years ago. And why would it be so prevalent that that's what my subconscious is showing me over and over again in these sessions? And what we began to understand was almost a haunting tale of something that was trying to show us that we're repeating history once again now, of something that that actually could have destroyed our civilization at one point or another. So would you like to know a little bit more about that past life in specific? Or do you have any
Um,
questions so far?
yeah, well, I'm surprised that it's, I mean, I think in terms of just recent generations, maybe 200 or 300 years, but 50,000 years is very surprising to me. And then how many lifetimes are generated over a period of time like that? Um, I mean, 50,000 years, then there's probably hundreds or thousands of lifetimes over that time span. It's amazing to sort of isolate it back that far.
Truly.
Yeah.
And that's just a guesstimate too of what I've been able to gauge from the experience. But that's also, if you look at it in 50,000 years, a lot of people believe that the possibility of time being just fictionalized and our past lives are not actually happening in a chronological order, but perhaps happening either simultaneously or in a order of what our soul needs to learn and accomplish rather than through a timely linear pattern. So there's
Right.
lots of different ideas of past lives and how we approach them and how we gauge them and what they, mean time-wise in our lives. But I've come to understand the more I learn, the more I know nothing. So I try to just take in as many possibilities as possible and work with them and see what fits best, in this big puzzle. So this past life, 50,000 years ago, was a really interesting one. I understood that I had been born the daughter of a queen, that I would one day become queen to these people as well. But there was a process involved. We needed to have a certain education. We needed to become well versed in, just your regular authoritarian rule, not authoritarian rules, but the authority of that brings you to this position. You need to become familiar with how to use it and how to keep your people happy. Just the whole type of education I kind of get into in my book of what was involved in this matriarchal society. Our process of becoming a queen had to involve, there was quite a lot that happened, but by the time you were about 25, you would take over the throne. So you were given about a 20-year rule, 25-year rule. It kind of depended on what was going on. And I found myself at a point in my life where I was ready to kind of take power, but I wasn't ready mentally yet. I wasn't ready. I wasn't even sure if I wanted all of this. I had been artificially inseminated through an ancient process that created future rulers. So I had already had a daughter, a young child, and everything seemed lined up for my life to kind of just go down this one path that I knew was going to be my life, no matter what I chose, left or right. And we had this ability in our matriarchal line to connect with what we thought was like an otherworldly power. We weren't 100% sure what it was, but we knew it dated back to our earliest ancestors. And our earliest ancestors, we believed, were people from the stars who had come here to this planet to colonize it in order to extend their own lives. Their own home planet was dying. They knew they needed to continue. And the best thing to do was to kind of sprinkle these seeds here on Earth and allow them to grow and evolve on their own and come back at a different point in their future where they were more evolved and they could start to work with them and create civilizations and societies. And we believed we still had a very strong contact with these original genes and these original abilities from these people who came, well, people beings who came from the other planet to colonize the Earth. Okay, so with all of that in mind, I had a moment in my life where I looked pretty much like I was going to possibly leave this situation or not, and I was not given the choice to leave. I had to stay. And we were visited by these strange people who came to us. They came in these large spheres that were almost iridescent and a greenish kind of iridescence to them. And they came to us and they said that we would like to know a bit more about these red crystals that your people use for guidance. And the red crystals dated back to our earliest ancient ancestors. It was dated back to the technology that they had used to kind of create their civilizations here. And they said, we have a virus within our society. We live on an island far from here, and we've been watching you. And we would like to know how you create the immunity for your people that you do with this red crystal. We need it for our island. Everyone is dying. We can't get rid of this. We're not sure how to continue. And to get further into it, we could not help them. And as a result of not being able to help us, they used their technology against our people and created a massive tsunami that came towards our island and obliterated the people who lived on it. As a result of all of this destruction and this devastation, I was taken by these people because I understood how to use these red crystals from our ancestral powers. And I was taken to their island. And a lot of people may be familiar with the concept of an island in the Atlantic Ocean that no longer exists any longer. Many people call it Atlantis, Atlantica, whatever you'd like to call it. But that was where their island was located. And they were a smaller island, a very advanced civilization. And they had been kept very much to themselves. They didn't like to mix with others. In fact, they didn't even want anyone knowing that they were there. So they were very covert in all their actions. I was taken to this island, and for the next 60 years, I write about in my book, I was experimented on and kept as a political prisoner while they tried to understand more of the powers of these crystals. Eventually, they realized I wasn't going to be of any help to them. And through a process of political upheaval throughout the Atlantean society, they basically just lost me within the prison systems over the years. Until one day, they had kind of what you would call like an uprising where their whole political system was overthrown and all the political prisoners were released from jail. And that's where I was found. So this is all the stuff that's coming out in these past life sessions over and over again. It's something that I myself, I just want to point out, like, I was never interested in Atlantis. I didn't even know what Lemuria was before all of this. I wasn't a scholar on the subject. I had no interest in it whatsoever. I wasn't even sure if I believed all of it, to be honest, when it first started coming out of my mouth. It kind of just sounded like a bit of a sci-fi fantasy, but the more we did these sessions, the more adamant my subconscious was that this was something that had happened, and it was something that was happening again to our society in its own special way, but it was going to ultimately lead to some kind of massive destruction. So we kept going with the sessions and we kept, going further into all of it. And 2020 came along and everyone had to slow down, sit down, stay home. I had just had another baby, so I had 4 young children at home. I had to homeschool them now, and we couldn't leave. And so in order to kind of keep my sanity during that time, I started writing at night. I thought that the tale that was coming out from my subconscious in these past life sessions was actually quite interesting when you pieced it all together. And if you take it as nothing more than just a story, it was a very interesting story, and it would be a good read, whether or not you believed in past lives or believed that this could have happened. So I dedicated myself through 2020 just to understanding more about it, piecing it all together, and finally writing a book. And that is kind of where I'm at this. Well, I'm a little bit further ahead than that, but that is where this whole idea kind of started to take form beyond me. So I wrote this book, I self-published it. The hypnotist, Sarah Breskman Cosme, that I worked with, she also wrote her own companion book. From the perspective of the hypnotist, she wrote all the transcripts and had them all transcribed of our sessions that talk about all of it and created her own book. And we released them simultaneously together in December of 2020. So I felt the best usage out of my 2020 imprisonment, whatever you want to call it, our time inside that I could. I used my time wisely. And at the end of the day, I was left with this book. And at first, I wasn't sure if it was something I really did want to share because I thought, my God, this stuff sounds crazy. Like, do I really want to jeopardize? I have an extensive education. I have businesses. I've been a teacher in my community. I'm well respected. Like, do I really want to just throw my life away and have everyone think I like had this crazy 2020 moment and all of a sudden now, I'm talking Atlantis and all kinds of crystals and crazy stuff. But the experience was profound for me. And not only was it profound on a spiritual and an emotional level, but it was profound on a medical level because I can see out of this eye now. All of the medication that I took, all of the doctors I saw at some of the top reaching, medical institutions in the United States could not help me. And this did help me. And I don't think it's magic. I think that there's so much more to the human brain that we're still understanding. And there's so much about stress and external toxic factors in our lives that cause so many of our illnesses and discomforts. And in many ways, we need to look at our illnesses a little bit differently because of how we are affected by our emotions and the situations surrounding us, It's no coincidence you would always get sick right before, the big math test that you'd have in school, you wouldn't be feeling well. We lead ourselves into these things in order to either protect ourselves or to enlighten ourselves when our subconscious and our conscious mind is just fighting against each other. So uh, before I go on, I just wanted to see if there was anything you wanted to throw in. I know I've been talking a lot, so.
Yeah, I mean, when let's say the lost colony or the ancient civilization, and that was my first thought that it's that it was maybe some connection or communication to a different part of the universe. That civilization was communicating with and existed as part of. So that was sort of amazing. That was my first thought. Um, have any of the past lives been more recent than that history, or
Yeah.
have you been just sort of around that time frame? Something more recent. Even the fact that it just jumped into my mind, even the fact that you ended up in Hawaii, closer to where the original civilization was, it's just sort of a wild coincidence.
I don't think it's a coincidence at all, to be honest. And that was something I wanted to actually mention to you. I'm glad you brought it up. So I now live in Hawaii. I no longer live in the Florida Keys. Coincidentally, after I went and released the book, I threw it out there onto Amazon. I self-published it. And suddenly my life just took this complete left turn. Out of nowhere, we had this opportunity to move. And we wanted to move, but we were always afraid to do it. We were never sure if this was something we could afford to do. We've kind of felt trapped where we were in our lives. And this opportunity came across and we said, let's just go for it. Let's do it. So my family we sold everything we had. And within a few months, we had sold our house. We sold everything we literally couldn't fit into a suitcase to take over with us. And we embarked on a journey and we moved our family literally to the other side of the world and found a home on the big island of Hawaii. And when I first got here, I wasn't sure if I had made the right decision or not. It's not an easy trek to make with little children. I had an 18-month-old at the time, and it was quite but it was invigorating. It was exhilarating to do. I felt like the world was my oyster. We could pretty much do anything now that we had left that life behind, and we did. So we decided to live here on the Big Island. We bought a beautiful rocky lot in paradise over here, and we've built our own sustainable home. We've created a world for ourselves that we couldn't have back in the Keys. And it really, I felt like this publishing of this book and accepting that this was a possible past life of mine and this was possibly something to learn from opened up something for me in my future that was not available before I decided to do this. And the self understanding and the recognition that I've understood from these past lives has taught me so much that it has allowed for me to move forward to this. And moving here to Hawaii, many people do believe that Hawaii is one of the last remnants of what would have been that missing continent in the Pacific, the remnants of Lemuria, of Mu. What I've seen and what I've felt and what I've encountered here only solidifies that is correct. I do feel there is a special power here. There is an energy, and there are so many people who are being called here. So many Native Indigenous Hawaiians as well are reawakening to this call of re-understanding who they truly are and what's been stolen from them and taken from them mentally and physically. And it's kind of an amazing time to be here and to be living here and to be experiencing this. And I really would not have had this opportunity had I not just gone with, lived my safe, protected life, letting everyone think I was just, this this other person. And this has led me into a whole different world of understanding. And I don't want to brag, but my life is just so much more peaceful now. It's so much simpler and it's way happier than it ever could have been when I was living that other life and lifestyle, but when I was sick in the Keys. So it's kind of amazing to see what just starting to understand my past lives opened up for me and the power that was behind them, even though it was something I originally just kind of dismissed and fought off for a while. But, you know,
Right. Now, some of the health issues that you had, were they essentially maybe part of your original, um, one of your original lives that carried forward? Um, I mean, I've heard of that in discussions that, sometimes our uh, obstacles and things that we have to overcome are things that have come with us from past lives.
I think it's not something directly that happened to me in a past life, this specific illness, but
Mhm.
what it allowed for me to do is it put enough pressure on me to remove myself from that shell, that protective shell of, this is it. This is who I am. There are no other past lives. There's no other instances. This is it. This is our only version of reality and ourselves. And it allowed me to move past that and to see ourselves as more of like multi-dimensional beings rather than just Jen, who lives in Hawaii, who is living this life right now. It really broadens your spectrum of like how you and I are connected, how myself and my children are connected, how beyond all of these physicalities, we are actually just one united source. And it's something that has truly changed the way it's shaped my perspective differently as a result. So there's that.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you worked with any other hypnotists or just with the
I
Miss
have
Cosby?
I have actually. I
Yeah.
worked with Sarah Breskman Cosme for quite a
Mhm.
while in the Keys, but she's become very famous and well known, so it's kind of hard to get time with her anymore. But I have worked with another QHHT practitioner, that's the quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner, and I believe he was a guest recently on one of your shows, Martin Rivera.
Okay, yes. Mhm.
Well, and he was sharing a lot about his own experiences in hypnosis and all about just the kind of special, stories and understandings that have come to him through this. Because, he's not going to
Yeah,
get the same stories as me. He's going to get his own, what's part of his soul, what's part of his own Akashic record, if you believe in that, any of that kind of pathway work. So he's got his own interesting stuff to talk about. And I've worked with him and I've worked with another practitioner who's in New Zealand briefly. And I'm honestly open to trying all different kinds of meditation techniques, hypnosis. I think the more you learn, the better. It's just a fascinating, endless world of stuff that up until recently, most people had kind of just, looked at as ridiculous and dismissed it and thought this was not something a respected person would look at or consider. So I'm having a lot of fun looking at all different versions of getting in touch with your inner self.
right. But it's a small community in terms of practitioners and people that we can access to help us with that exploration. Because I know here in New Jersey, and I don't think we've really found anybody that was offering that service or that So
I know on their website, if you go to the QHHT mainstream website, I understand they keep a list of practitioners by state on there, if that's
okay,
something. But for other people who may not really have either the money or the ability to get to a practitioner, one of the biggest things I could recommend is just using YouTube and the internet as your own resource just to kind of get familiarized and started. There's different things on YouTube, like from Dr. Brian Weiss. He has some past life regression, hypnotic uh, videos that you can watch. And there's so many other practitioners too. You just have to do a couple of YouTube searches and you can find something that you relate to that resonates with you. And
right,
I would recommend for anyone wanting to learn more just on their own beyond a practitioner, going and looking at these videos, doing them in a quiet room and getting a notebook and just writing your questions down, writing anything that pops out to you down and just kind of keeping a notebook of these experiences until something starts to connect and click and grow a bigger picture for you. And that's kind of what I did in my experience. I kept a very careful notebook of all my sessions. I re-listened to all of my recordings from my sessions over and over again. And it's funny, you can listen to the same recording 5 times and hear 5 different things.
Mhm.
And the more you understand about yourself, the more you understand what your subconscious is saying to you in these sessions. So there's so many levels of growth, like an onion, like a sweet onion. You can kind of dig into a lot of this on your own, but it is a lot easier with a practitioner. I will admit, I was very lucky and fortunate to have one who offered me the sessions so frequently and for free. So also another, I don't believe was a coincidence. I think the universe kind of lines up with you based on what you need if you're ready and willing to accept it. So that was my opportunity that I seized, and it completely changed my life.
Okay. You have a sort of a feeling now that we're more eternal, that well, not just past lives, but all the lives are just a continuum, or is there a
Right.
beginning and end, and how this all manifests itself, how we communicate not only with the lives of this earth, but the lives universally that we might have had or experienced. Uh, is it more expansive now that you might have felt before some of these experiences?
Oh, yeah. I think all of those and above, the understandings that have come to me about just how eternal we are really points out to me all the lessons that we learn in our lifetimes. You look at people's lives, you look at your own life, and many times you try to compare lives, you try to justify things that have happened, you try to look at life and understand, well, why do bad things happen to good people? That's not deserving. Where is justice? And I think so much of that could really be understood on a better level when you start looking at yourself as an eternal being, rather than a single individual experiencing a short burst of life in this incarnation. We are setting up these missions for ourselves in these different lifetimes to accomplish different things and to understand different things, to fully, I feel, embrace the human experience and to really get everything we can out of it. And unfortunately, the good must go with the bad. And sometimes we find that, life is unfair and things that we love are taken away from us forever. And the best thing I could come to say about all of that is that we are all part of this system. So as much as I would like to say, like, you and I are completely different people, we're really not. On a very cellular level, on a molecular level, we're all part of something greater. And whatever you want to call this energy force, this source, this thing that creates us and allows us to live through all these different incarnations, everything we learn and absorb in these incarnations goes back to this energy source, and
Right.
it evolves it and it grows it. And it makes it so our suffering is not in vain, and that our happiness and our joy is something that allows us to grow. And I prefer to look at the world like that now, rather than look and understand, like, well, why is this happening? Why are these children starving to death? Why is that happening? Why are we not more equal in everything? But everything is a learning experience, and we have to go through it in order to learn from it, or we learn nothing. And we are continuously left in this cycle of having to repeat things before we truly embrace what it is that we're supposed to learn, whether it be patience, compassion, understanding, tolerance. There's so many things you can look at our society and say, well, we do need to work on that. Well, that's what we're learning right now. And the only way to learn it is to live through the good and the bad of it all, and hopefully move on to a future where we are in a better situation for all of us and we've learned from these things and we can move past them and create something even better.
We, I know we found that Ernie gives us a lot of our teachings, or has in the past. That's why we're sort of associated. Um, but there were many examples that we've learned over the past few years of young children in particular who remember past lives, because they haven't been conditioned to forget those. And you have young children. Have you recognized anything in your children of maybe their ability to remember past lives? Or
It's interesting you say that because the child that I wrote about in my first book, Child of the Universe,
Mhm.
the daughter I spoke about that would one day be queen after me, I believe is one of my children in this incarnation. And I feel that we have actually been kept apart from each other for a very long time in order to fulfill what we lost and we missed out on in that past lifetime. And she's a very special child to me for that reason. And when I explained to her one day what mommy wrote about, she said, that just sounds so familiar.
yeah.
And I don't like to plant ideas in their head. I don't like to force them to think about any of this stuff, but I think they, you know, we get paired up with people for a reason, whether they're our children, our spouses, or just friends, anyone who comes into our
Right.
life. And I think past lives really help you understand those relationships a lot better too. And it makes it more meaningful whether you're going through a rough time or a great time with that person. I think there are a lot of people who'll look and say, oh man, I definitely must have had a rough past life with you and we're working some stuff out this time, you know? But it's all part of just something so much greater and so much larger than us. And I think it's kind of amazing. Oh, and here's an interesting thing. I thought you might be interested in learning about this. So I put the book out there and I published it, and I started getting people reading it all over the place. And suddenly I started getting all these emails and letters from people writing to me, saying to me, I read your book and I remember this. And I've read your book and I have had dreams about this my whole life. And I read your book and I remember being there and I remember that person. And I have like a list, I have a stack of emails and letters from people all resonating and verifying with me that this was something that they too have felt and understood or have gone through past life regression hypnosis, and they remember very clearly everything that I was talking about. So it made me feel a lot less alone and almost a lot less embarrassed about putting something out there like that when I started seeing the resonation in other people who were saying to me, you're onto something. This isn't just, a fairy tale. This kind of stuff has haunted my dreams my whole life, and I'm so glad you wrote about it. A lot of people told me about the wave. So the tsunami that I told you about that the people had sent to destroy our island, that was something most people were very, very powerfully writing to me about. They were saying they remember the tsunami, they remember how these people had come. And that was something my whole life, even as a child, I dreamt of. I dreamt of this specific wave of water coming towards me and turning and trying to climb up this white limestone cliff wall behind me to get off the beach, trying to get to something to try and protect someone. And now I know from all my sessions, I was having that experience in a past life, and I was trying to get to my child to protect my child and save her. And I wasn't
Yeah.
able to in that lifetime. And a lot of people look at past lifetimes now as they're starting to understand it, and they think that we carry trauma from past lives into our current lives. And sometimes we make a lot of the same mistakes over and over again because of this trauma we carry. Some people think we may carry it, spiritually. Some people think we may even carry it in our DNA somehow. And it's something that's beyond past lives and just a whole encompassing formula of past lives, ancestors, all kinds of different interesting theories. So I know I'm not alone in my beliefs about what I've experienced, and I've become so much more comfortable talking about them with people as I've begun to understand that they share a lot of this information too.
Yeah. Um, I know, and I don't have the author of but I know there's been some discussion or something about the lives between lives. Yeah.
Yes.
And is whether it's a spiritual destination, before you return to this universe or something. Do you have any idea about
Yeah.
thoughts about life between lives?
Let me share with you a little bit of what I've learned about that. So I wrote my first book, Child of the Universe, and I talked all about in that book that lifetime in Lemuria and Atlantis. But then I wrote as a second book, this is the second one I put out. It's called The Gift of the Stars. And I talk a lot about the in-between world between life and death in this book. If you go back and recall the past life that I first encountered, the young woman, her name was Christy, that I once was in the 1970s, and I lived in New York City. And I write all about her lifetime in this book and what led her from becoming just a very, a woman with a good head on her shoulders into becoming someone who ends up jumping off a bridge at an early age in her life. Like what leads someone on that pathway and why, why was there no one there to help her and what was going on? So this whole book, I try to understand more of that spiral and where it leads you and what happens to people who do decide to end their lives and what happens to them afterwards. Now, I grew up understanding a lot about different religions around the world. I was very exposed to many major world religions, and most of them have a very negative understanding of you ending your own life, and they tell you you go to hell, you go here, you just whatever, you're cursed. What I began to understand from my sessions is none of that was true. That when a person's life ends, what we go to is we go to a period of resting. So the soul rests for a certain period of time after the death. It could be a short period of time, it could be long. It just all depends on what's really going on in those incarnations and what's happening there. I decided to rest for a couple of years before I came back and became this person, Jen, in this incarnation. And the room that I remember being in the in-between world, it almost felt like a room. It was very cylindrical. I felt like there was a large cylinder, a very thick cylinder around me. And it went very high up. And the higher up you can go, the more you can see these rings around you that were your records of your incarnations, of your different lifetimes. And there were so many of them there. And it was almost like just, your own way of record keeping of what's going on for you and what you've gained and experienced and lost and loved and all that kind of stuff. And when you go to rest, that's where you're brought, and you are to remain there until you feel that you no longer need to rest. And when you no longer need to rest, you review your lifetime. So I met with what you would call a guide, your spirit, your whatever you want to call it, the form of energy that you are an extension of, that knows you. So you meet with this energy force and it comes to you and you talk with it about or just discuss your lifetime. You can look at the whole life, you can look at just clips of the life, but they want to know what are we gaining? What are we contributing to this eternal source of energy? What are we showing it? And you become very, as a perspective, you just see that whole life very differently. And you see it for what it was and not what you were blinded to see it as while you were alive. And you make some pretty good understandings about what that life did accomplish, whether it was very short, very long, whether you were a good person or a bad person, whatever label and conditioning you want to put on it. But you see it free of all of that judgment and all of that conditioning. And once you're done with that review, you make the choice of whether you'd like to go back and you'd like to be reborn and reincarnated, and how you would like that to happen and what you would like to accomplish in that lifetime. And you wait for an opportunity that will fit all of those things to open up. And, there's billions of us at this point. So now there's more opportunity than ever to jump in wherever you want. And if you choose not to, then you just go back to resting until you're ready to do something different. And there's no time limit. You don't have to be out by the 31st, it's not like the doors close at 5 p.m. It's eternal energy. So you just stay and simmer and contribute, and you're just there until you're ready to come back and play this crazy game that we all come into. And that was what I began to understand about the in-between world between your lives, your current lives, and your past lives, that there is a special place we do all go to. And it is a place of resting, of recognition, and of just betterment and growth for our soul.
Very nice. I mean, that's a confirmation of what we've heard from other individuals about their understanding of how these lives come and go, and we go through cycles. Do you believe that you've ever been to a civilization in a different part of the universe? Even ever been part of something not of the human condition?
Very good question. So I do actually write about that too in my book, the first one. I write about the first civilizations to come from the stars, to come here to Earth and to begin their colonization efforts. And one of the past lives that I recalled was being one of these beings, a commander on a ship, making our way to Earth to set up one of these big colonies. And I write all about how our ship crash landed. We had some issues once we came into the airspace around Earth. We crash landed and we had to basically depend on this indigenous group of humans for our survival. And we lived with them for quite a while, understanding how they created food, clothing, how they utilized nature and the world around them. And we imparted on them the technology that we could salvage from our crashed ship and worked with them. And I write all about this experience of like being a traveler between two worlds at that point, having understood everything from the past on our home planet and bringing forth this new knowledge to create this new world on Earth. And that's something also I'm working on a third book right now. And a lot of that I'm traveling into the third book and going back and exploring, well, what is this home planet? What was this that we came from? And what was their history? And what led them to this point? And are we just the next box that's being checked on this list of evolutionary, points that we must get to as a species, because if that is true, then we are part of whatever they were on this home planet, if that's what it is. And if that's the case, then how many times has this already happened? How many other home planets have there been? And
Right.
where is it all going? And what's the point of it? So I'm looking at that right now for my third book as I look at another past life. We got into so many past lives. So many of the sessions would talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, but there were also so many of them that would talk about all different kinds of past lives. And the one that I'm working on right now for book number 3, I know people are a bit familiar with the Anunnaki and ancient Sumerian, pre-Sumerian civilizations. And that was a whole nother past life I got into, and understanding how people or beings from other planets and other places have come to this place, this earth, and colonized it in all different kinds of ways. Not always the friendly colonization you'd hope, but more often the realistic, terrible colonization of enslavement. So that's the third book we're looking at right now.
Um, I'm trying to formulate this question.
Take your time.
The well, normally, just by the way we think as being humans, we think of physically colonizing something, um, but it could be just the spiritual energy kind transformation to these energies came from somewhere else in the universe to colonize, as you said, the indigenous people on Earth, and but to add to what they have, but to add, energy and intelligence and education to that. Um,
True.
so, I mean, it's not necessarily that we have space aliens arriving here to colonize the Earth, but um, just the intelligence and that energy and intellect
Truly.
can be transported here and added to the existing culture.
Exactly. There's also the element of intent too, when you look at the possibility of our you know of human beings being from somewhere else. How did we get here? And once we did get here, if we were being colonized from somewhere else, it would be the intent of the colonizers how our, growth would go. The intent from some of those who came to colonize was good and nurturing and loving and very
Right.
spiritual and profound. And it created colonies where people felt a very distinct wholeness amongst themselves. And that was something that continued into our original colony in Lemuria, which, or Amun, as I call it in my book, the Pacific continent. Whereas on the continent or the island of what you would call Atlantis, the intent there was to create a slave race of people, to mine things and to create um, enough raw material to recreate the images of the home planet for the colonizers there. So one planet, two distinct forms of colonization. It all just comes down to intent. And I think that's a big part of our human experience too, you know, is how we try to utilize for our own advantage things, whether or not we really think it's what's best for everyone around us. But that gets into a whole sticky situation. So I think we have a very long history of this, way longer than any of us are willing to acknowledge.
Absolutely. We need to learn to step outside the box and believe that all things are possible, right? Okay, we have a few people on the. Anybody, any other questions for Jen?
Here's one interesting thing, if anybody, that I've noticed, but I'll go ahead if there was someone who had a question.
Either way. Adriana.
Okay. Hi, Jen. Thank you for being with us. I have a curiosity. Sorry for my English. When you were under hypnosis, did you feel anything physical, emotion-wise? You feel the emotion, you can feel it like, all right, I'm ready to die, or something happened in that specific life?
You can feel both everything and nothing if you choose in hypnosis. So my the hypnosis practitioner, Sarah, that I met with, if she saw that I was becoming that, if the memories were becoming too much and too overwhelming, she would tell me in the hypnosis, you are now going to see this as an observer and you will not feel any emotional attachment to the event. And like this, your brain just shifts and you're above and you see it, but you don't feel the emotional attachment to it. And it allows you to look and to understand it from a different perspective. And it often brings different understanding to it. So some days it would be very emotional going through this. Some days I would be crying while I'm being hypnotized, and she would be able to just say, now you see it as an observer. Some days, though, I would even have physical pain while I was in the session, like, let's say I had this one past life that we looked at where I kept feeling this like pain on the side of my head, and it was happening in the session. But as soon as she would say, you don't feel it anymore, your brain just shuts it off and you don't feel it anymore. So it opened my eyes to just how powerful our brains are to messages and, you know, just treating pain in itself. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there are many people who believe in hypnobirthing, of giving birth and using only hypnosis to remove the pain from the experience. So even going beyond understanding past lives, I think there is a lot to understand there about removing yourself from an experience so you don't feel the pain that's associated with it. It's very strange, isn't it?
It does, yes. I mean, like I shared with Martin, the technique for me is amazing. I mean, it's a piece of tool, really, really important, and can help a lot of people.
Definitely. It's
And
probably those who aren't familiar with it too. Like I see people who struggle with, you know, pill addiction and finding any kind of relief from their illnesses. And most people are very unaware of that, you know, you can utilize your brain power in this way.
yes, definitely. And when you mentioned in your past life, you were in Atlantis, and you mentioned it about that was a very advanced civilization. Can you share with us what made you to say that? You saw something, you felt something? How was the life in that time?
Sure. Well, in comparison to the life I felt like two lives in that lifetime. I lived one life in the Pacific on our island, and our island was very advanced spiritually and very advanced as far as like our minds and our connections to each other and the way we loved and felt for each other. But we were not advanced as far as having technology like, you know, like televisions, you know, any iPhones, anything like that. We didn't have that on that island. But in comparison, the island that we would call Atlantis that I was taken to was very technologically advanced, where they had machines on the walls that looked like rectangles that could communicate between the different homes, almost very similar to what we have now in our houses, where we have iPads and things like that. I remember seeing in this lifetime, even though I spent much of it within a prison, when I was freed from the prison during its last days before the island had its cataclysm and ended, I saw bridges, I saw buildings that were multi-levels, almost like skyscrapers being built. I saw technology that allowed people to go in little cars underneath the water, and they could just breathe in the water without having any kind of apparatus or equipment. So it was fascinating. They had hospitals, they had medicine, they had vaccines, they had all kinds of things, needles, and it was a completely different world than what I had grown up with in this spiritual community. But what they were missing, they had no spiritual connection, and they were very cold and scientific. And it was, you know, we were each missing a part of this puzzle. And when it came together, it was the perfect civilization, but it could never be together. So,
I see.
yeah.
This is super for me. How you can retain all the information on you after you come to the real life or this present?
Well, it's interesting because once you go through the session and you remember it, it's kind of like this. If I went into my grandmother's house and or like I smell someone cooking something my grandmother made, even though my grandmother has been dead for years and years, when I smell that smell, I suddenly remember all these things that I'm not thinking about her every day. And it brings me right back to her house. And I can tell you clearly everything going on. It kind of feels like that. It has that effect that once you remember it in your past life regression hypnosis, it's part of you again. Like you remember it and it's just there. So when I have to recall and think about it, it's like I'm thinking about what I bought last week at, Target for the kids. It's on the same level. It just is no longer part of your soul memory. It's part of just your everyday memory, and it just sticks with you again until the next time, right?
Wow. You were easy to identify yourself in that time, in that life. You knew right away that person was you.
Well, the hypnotist will take you very slow through the process. So the first thing that they'll tell you is look down at your feet. Are you wearing shoes? Where are you? Where are your feet? And you go very slowly up the body. You look at what's below you. You look at your hands. They say, can you try to look into a mirror and see yourself? What do you see there? And you go very slow. So that way you don't go like, oh my God, too much. I didn't want to remember that. I forgot. The brain kind of protects you. So you go into it gently, you ease into it, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. And then you just start remembering more and more and more. And it gets easier the more you do it. So the first session took me a while to understand. The second session, better. By the 50th session, it was so easy. I could go, I didn't even have to think about it. She'd put me under the hypnotic trance and we could go right to where we wanted to go. And,
what do you recommend for us to do before we go to the session? It's easy because I heard so many people say, I didn't feel nothing.
It's interesting because some people, back maybe 20, 30 years ago, everyone who was hypnotized, most people, like 95% of people, would go into a hypnotic trance that they called the somnambulistic state. And you wouldn't remember being hypnotized. And you could, they'd make you cluck like a chicken, do all kinds of crazy things. You wouldn't remember anything from the hypnosis, but you can talk and talk and talk, and they would tell you what you said. They think now, most of us, 95% of the time, we don't do that anymore, that our brains have changed because we are evolving as a species, and that none of us go to the somnambulistic state, that we're all very conscious while we're in hypnosis and we're aware of what's going on around us. And very few people now go into the state where they don't remember anything. And just from that information, I thought that was very interesting how we're changing so much. But also, like when you're in the state, it's not something you need to fight. A lot of people question it when they're in it. They'll say, "Oh, that's strange, that's weird. I don't know, that's not for me." And they fight it, they'll ignore it, they'll go away from it. So the other part is to not be afraid, to just have the experience no matter what it is, to not need it to look a certain way or feel a certain way or feel embarrassed by it, to just be okay with who you may have been and understand it better, because it's not here to hurt you. It's just there to help you understand yourself, the very many levels that you are.
You consider it with repeat stuff from past life?
Oh, yeah. Painfully, we repeat things, I believe, until we've actually accepted that that is part of our life, or that this is who we are. You know, I think we are finally getting to a point in our civilization where many of us are free to be who we really are. And we don't have to pretend to be someone else to fit in, to feel like we are part of society. And that's starting to trickle into people's subconscious, especially if you have past life trauma related to these kind of things. It's something that kind of helps to release you, to liberate you from a lot of conditioning that you would have had. You know, we've had a lot of conditioning in our lifetimes to believe certain things, to make things happen in a certain way. And I think this kind of just takes the lid off of all of it and allows you to make those choices rather than to have society tell you what you should and shouldn't be believing and doing. I
Yes.
think it's something we used to do a lot more, to be honest, and I think we were taken away from it, that we were removed from it as more, you know, religions realized they could control and dominate over people historically, that we've lost our connection to that, and we used to have a very strong connection to it also.
So it's so many cases that I heard people's comment as this phrase, I feel like I am trapped in this body, but this is not me.
Mhm.
So this type of therapy can help them, how they can manage to live in a body doesn't match with them.
I think if they're willing to let it help and to open up to themselves that way, then yeah, it will be very helpful. But at the end of the day, we make all the choices for ourselves. We decide what we're going to allow to work and what we're not going to let work. And if we feel that our reality is being broken up too much, sometimes people need to go back into the protective egg and stay, you know, safe in their old conditioned beliefs. But when you're ready to go beyond yourself and to see what else is there for you beyond what you recognize just in your everyday world, the opportunity is there for everyone. Everyone.
That's very nice. It's safe to go and has the session often?
Yeah, I felt it was very safe. In fact, here's a really interesting thing that I got from the whole experience. When I became sick with my illness with my eye, my doctor told me it'd be very unsafe if you became pregnant and had a child. And what happened? I became pregnant. And I went, okay, all right. So I wanted to have my baby. So I decided to go ahead with this very long, difficult, dangerous pregnancy. And I went every week and did my hypnosis with my friend Sarah, with this woman. And I felt every time I did the hypnosis, it brought my blood pressure down. It helped reset my body. It helped me feel good about myself. And guess what? I made it through the whole pregnancy and I delivered a beautiful, healthy baby. And I swear to you, I feel that so much of it was made possible because I allowed my body to not get overwhelmed. And the hypnosis helped me stay calm, cool, collected. It allowed me to be part of myself rather than afraid of my future. And so if you say too much, no, I don't think too much would hurt at all. If anything, I feel like it made me closer and more connected to the world around me.
Wow. Like Mark asked before, if you recognize in one of your child anybody from any past life, but beside that is, do you been cross of a person where you feel, because that happened to me very often, you feel like where I know this person? No, I know, but I can't remember from where.
Yeah, I've had that good and bad, right? Sometimes you meet someone and you're like, oh, woo, that's some crazy energy. I think I knew you from somewhere else, but I don't know if that was the best lifetime. But then you'll meet other people and you just feel this love or this intense, like, attraction, maybe not physical attraction, but mental attraction. And you're like, what is that there? And I don't know, but I know that in the Eastern world, like in Korea, in China, they have different words that describe these lifetimes where it takes thousands of lifetimes for you to meet these people again. And when you do cross their paths in this life, you feel the energy, you recognize it. You may have forgotten the whole story behind how you two knew each other, but you'll feel like that energy, that connection between the two, and you'll feel the goosebumps and, to just trust it and go with it. A lot of people might recognize it back with you as well. So it's interesting to see the recycling of souls over and over again.
Even so, places sometimes that happened to me. I was in Barcelona and just walking in the sidewalk, I keep looking on my feet because I feel like I was at home. I don't know, my brain gets so confused because it was my first time there, but I keep looking on the sidewalk, my feet, because I feel like I did this before.
Yes. I had a very similar experience when I was a young woman and I received a scholarship to study in London, in England. And I found myself there for the first time ever. And the strangest thing was I felt I knew my way around the town without actually have ever been there before. And
Wow.
there were places I went to and I would find myself and I would say, this is so strange. I feel like I remember this, but that's, I guess those are more sessions we have to do to figure out, right? What
Wow.
all that meant. So,
I love this topic. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much for everything what you sharing with us. It's very interesting.
oh, thank you.
Um,
And Mhm.
well, we have one question from if there are any disadvantages that
Hmm.
you have encountered, going through sessions or remembering past lives.
I think the only disadvantage that I encountered was after I put my book out, not everybody feels the same way about past lives. And I think some people who used to see me a bit differently and respected me a bit more changed their opinions of me. But that's not really something I feel was a major disadvantage in my life. It may have just been a bit disappointing at times, but I think all in all, it's really has no big disadvantages to it, other than it may cost some people money to go and do if you find that as a disadvantage. But otherwise, no, it's been an overwhelmingly positive experience in my life and one that I highly recommend to people.
Um, well, and just basically remembering multiple lifetimes and things. Uh, the cycle of lifetimes. Is there a goal of perfection? Is there a goal of nirvana, or it's just cycling lifetimes to just learn lessons and continue?
I think if there was a goal, it would incline to mean that there would be an end to all of this. And since we're eternal beings, I don't
Right.
think the point is actually a goal. I think that's human conditioning for us to think we need to have some solid ending and, a way that it's all going to add up and equalize something. I think we're not able to fully understand on our human level just what it's all going to add up to eventually. But I do think if you look at the process of evolution, it's very similar, and that's what it is. We are just growing and learning and adding to things. And just like the infant who leaves the womb learns and grows and one day walks and eats on their own, that's kind of the process that we are in. And I'm not really sure where it's all going to go, but I think that's also part of intent with how we choose and what we choose in our lifetimes. It may take us a lot longer to get to a good place, but I think part of the things we experience in this lifetime and we see in the news and all around us, it's all part of what's shaping this larger collection of things. And the quicker we get over needing destruction and death and warfare and unjust situations, the sooner we'll get to a different part of our evolvement where we focus on different things that we're not even aware of yet.
Right. The idea of good and evil is just a human concept. It's not really a spiritual concept. Okay.
It doesn't really exist. It's just something we label and we believe and we think helps us understand the world around us, but it really doesn't. It just puts everything into neat little categories that we like to kind of pile everything up into. And that's just a total human trait. Like, we need to make sense of things, so we add and subtract and we think it's going to all add up to something. And does it ever really add up to something? Doesn't always have to.
Yeah.
Just the experience itself is really the true journey and the pleasure of it all to have been involved in.
Good. Is there anything you'd like to add? I don't know if we're closing or if we can just continue.
I'm always interested in hearing from people who have had interesting experiences as far as learning about their own past lives, people who have had experiences similar to those that I write about in my books. A lot of people feel inclined towards the worlds of Atlantis and Lemuria. So if you're interested and you want to read my books, and if you feel connected to them in a certain way, I'd love for you to write to me, connect to me through my website. Let me know about your own experience, because I feel that this is something that is explained and understood on a whole different level when we start to communicate about it and we start to learn from each other and grow from each other. So for me, one of the most pleasurable parts of this whole experience has been hearing from people. So I'd like to throw it out there. If there's anyone who watches this who'd like to communicate and kind of understand a bit more, I'm very happy to hear from people and write back and talk all about this kind of stuff with them. So I just like to throw that out there at the end.
Very good. And of course, you're JLF Sullivan on all the social medias.
Yep, that's me.
Yep.
I go by that as my writer name. My name is Jen, but I've got a whole bunch of names to begin with, so I kind of shorten it all into JLF to keep it easy for you. And yeah, you can find my books and more information about me on my website, which is jlfsullivan.com. And my books are all on Amazon. If you don't have access to Amazon, you can buy digital copies on the website. But there's all different kinds of ways that you can learn about past lives, not just entirely through me. You can read the books of the hypnotist that I worked with, Sarah Brexman Cosme. She wrote some really good books. They're called A Hypnotist's Journey to Atlantis and A Hypnotist's Journey to the Secrets of the Sphinx. Those are also on Amazon. And I would also suggest checking out the QHHT website, finding a practitioner nearby with you, or even just looking on YouTube. Get yourself into it. Try it out. See, YouTube's free. Just try one out one night before you go to bed and see what comes up for you. You never know.
Very good. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Jan. It's been very informative, very entertaining. I'm sure we're going to buy your book and delve into this a little deeper. It was a very nice presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to listen to this strange experience I've had and to consider it as something that is beyond within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, we keep hearing this subject all the time, so it's very exciting. And thank you to everyone else who's on the line, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Our guest will be Holly Duckworth discussing surprising healing from the higher self. So I'm sure there's a little bit of the same subject involved here. So good.
Holly is a QHH practitioner too, so she's
Yeah.
also someone you can look to for getting that same experience.
Very good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.